So we recently enhanced the user login features on the Eyecon to give you more capabilities on how you can record which users have filled which prescription on the Eyecon. So I'd like to go over those with you now. So if you click the settings menu to get into the configuration menus, then click login scan out. The top selection has been here for quite some time. That defines whether you want to require users to have to log in order to access the settings menus. So if you want to lock down the Eyecon so your average user of the Eyecon can't make any configuration changes, then you should enable this to be required. I leave it off for my convenience. And the next thing is user lookup. What that is intended for is there's two ways to configure a barcode for your Eyecon. One is just to encode the user's name in the barcode or the identity, and you don't have to look it up. You can just record whatever gets scanned. The only catch there is you need to make sure all the barcodes are the same number of characters long. So you'd have to choose, say, a three character and just use the first, middle, and last initial of their name, for instance, or 7 characters and grab the first 3 digits of their first name and the next 4 of their last name, and that's another method. Whatever you do, if you use the user lookup off, then you have to have a fixed length for your barcode so the Eyecon knows when it sees a barcode of that length that it must be a user barcode. One caveat is we recommend you don't make the barcodes a 12-digit barcode because the UPC barcodes on a prescription label are all 12 digits long, and we want the number of digits in the user barcode to be something different so it can distinguish user barcodes versus UPC barcodes. Similarly, if your PMSS interface barcodes on your prescription label from your pharmacy software provider have a certain length, then you should avoid that length as well for your user barcodes. However, most people prefer to go ahead and set up user lookup on. With user lookup on, the Eyecon is going to look up whatever you scanned in your barcode in a table to identify the person's name and what permissions they have for using the Eyecon. The next parameters in this menu define whether the entire contents of the barcode that's being scanned are to be captured and saved on the Eyecon or only a portion thereof. So the user barcode length, if you set that to -1, that means it's going to use whatever length barcode. -1 is kind of like an asterisk, meaning any length barcode. So if your barcodes could vary in length, then you'd want to set this to -1. The next is user lookup ID offset. So in some cases, some pharmacy systems have the first few digits of the barcode are not really user specific and they vary every day, such as an RDAC barcode, which stands for Random Daily Access Code barcode, used by a couple different pharmacy systems. So in that case, if you wanted to skip the first 6 digits of this 14-digit barcode and then grab the next 8 and use that as the lookup value, you would set this to the barcode length to 14, and I'm going to set the offset to 6 and the user ID length to be 8. So now it's going to always look for a 14-digit barcode, skip the first 6, and save the next 8. Now if I click Edit Users, if I go ahead and hit Add, I can add a new user. Then if I scan one of my user barcodes, it's going to modify it according to those selections we just made. In the case we just did, I'm going to skip the first 6 digits of this barcode and save the next 8, and I'm going to populate the user ID field with those 8. Most people, if they're not using something like an RDAC barcode, you're just going to set the Eyecon to capture the entire barcode. But this gives it a little more flexibility for those cases where you have a random prefix to the user ID. Next, the user name field you can populate with whatever you want to store for that particular user. So it could be their 3 initials, it could be their first name, their last name, or anything you can think of. In this case, I'm just going to put my first initial and my last name. But like I said, you can do that however you'd want. And then you have to specify a password for all users. The password is only used for accessing the settings menus, not for filling prescriptions, but we do require you to set it even if you don't require the user to use the login to get to the settings menus. So I'm just going to key in a real simple one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, OK. Remember that password, because if you forget it, all we can do is whoever logs in as a master user or an administrator user that can reset that and delete it, but you can't change it yourself unless you know your own password. So now there's 3 different levels of access levels that we allow for users. Admin allows all settings menus to be accessed. Supervisor allows most settings menus, but not the user setup menu that we're in right now. And user only allows the user to fill prescriptions using their barcode. So I'm going to go ahead and select admin for myself here. And there's one last selection here, and that's whether the user is allowed to train pills and/or edit drugs. So if you check that box, that gives them permission to edit drugs and train pills. If I click add user now, that user's been added into the menu, and you can see who has permissions. If you want to do another one, you can do the same thing, add, and scan your barcode and key in the details. I'm going to go ahead and cancel that. If I wanted to edit one of them, you could select one in the menu and then hit edit, and it allows me to modify some of the selections for that particular user. Or if I wanted to delete a user, I can do that as well. When I'm done adding and deleting users, I can exit back to this menu. The next selections define which modes we're going to use the user login. There's 2 choices for each mode of operation. So the 3 modes are count only mode, validation mode, and inventory mode. And the choices for each is pre-login or scan out. So pre-login means that the Eyecon's going to request that the user scan their badge before they start counting. I'm going to set validation mode to be scan out, and what that means is it requires the user to scan their badge instead of pressing finish at the end of the prescription fill. So they're both equally usable. It's up to your preference. I prefer the scan out, and that way if somebody starts filling a prescription and walks away, you know who finished the prescription. They're the ones responsible for making sure that prescription was filled correctly, not the person who started it, in the rare case where that happens to change in the middle of filling. And then for inventory mode, you may or may not want to capture users for that as well, and if you do, you can enable that accordingly with the same choices. If you do select pre-login, then the last choice is relevant, and the last choice is auto log off. So if I pre-logged in for filling a prescription, I can say after I finish that prescription, I can either have it automatically log me out if I set this to on for auto log out, and then before I can perform the next fill, it's going to ask me to scan my badge again. If I set it to off, then it's going to take me back to the scan vial label after I finish the prior prescription, so I can fill the next one without having to rescan my badge. This is not applicable for if you've set up your Eyecon to use the scan out feature, because it requires you to scan out for each prescription filled. So that completes the settings on the Eyecon for user logging. I can go ahead and demonstrate how that works. So we've got scan out for validation and pre-login for count only. So if I hit exit yes to save our changes, now if I hit count only, the first prompt that pops up is scan user login. You could hit manual login and type your number, but obviously that's a little less efficient than just scanning your badge. So now I've scanned my badge, and it advances to the next menu, scan stock item, and you can see the username is populated in the upper left corner. If I cancel out of there, if I go to validation mode, now I can demonstrate how that user login works there. So if I scan my prescription label, scan my stock item, pour my pills on the tray, scrape off the excess, get to the right quantity. Now you can see it says user scan out required, however it's grayed out and it says funnel not empty, so it's waiting for me to remove the excess pills off the tray. Now the user scan out is yellow. I can scan my badge to record that transaction, and the Eyecon proceeds and prompts me through the rest of the process for dumping the pills off the tray into the funnel, on the funnel onto the tray, and capture those 2 photos. So that completes the demonstration on how you can use the user login feature to capture who's filled which prescriptions.